Emma was lying on a warm bed and near her Alex. Their bodies still felt the heat of the newly lived. Their hearts fought in unison. Alex smiled, holding her hand on her hair. "You are incredible," he whispered. Suddenly, silence broke a sharp call of the phone. Her phone! Emma shuddered, but did not even have time to reach the device as Alex looked on the screen. His heart tapped so loudly that he seemed to hear his own blood in his temples. A familiar signature and photo. Mark shone on the display. Alex felt his breath. It was Mark Wilson, his chief. "What?" His voice broke into whispers. His eyes were rounded by shock. "Is this a joke?" Emma sharply grabbed the phone and rejected the call. Her face faded and her gaze ran away. "Alex, Is this your husband?" The cold in his voice could freeze everything around. Emma clenched the phone in her palms as if trying to hide the truth that had already spilled in the air with a bitter reality. "Yes," her voice broke. "It's Mark." Alex stepped back as if he got a blow. Excerpts of memoirs were raging in his head, morning meetings, sitting with a manager, advice he gave him as a friend. Lord. Alex ran a hand on his face, feeling the earth from under his feet. "I sleep with my boss's wife." The phone rang again, filling the room with an alarm. Emma rejected this time, but immediately a message came. "Where are you, Emma? I've returned before. I want to talk. Call." Alex suffocated from the influx of emotions, anger, confusion, betrayal. It was all a mistake." His voice trembled. "Do you even imagine what you did? What did we do?" Emma took a step towards him. "Alex, I did not want everything to happen. It was between us, real." "Real?" He smiled bitterly. "Real hell is what will start when he learns—" Alex felt his phone hanging out. Message from Mark. "Alex, you need your advice. I have suspicions about Emma. Can we talk?" Alex frozen, squeezing the phone so that his fingers whitened. "What to tell me?" he said quietly, looking at her. Emma was silent, and there was not just a call between them. A whole abyss hung. Alex stood in the middle of the room, feeling the world around him crashing at the seams. He did not respond to Mark's message, just turned off the phone, and despite Emma, was cold. "That's all. Between us, the end." He quickly dressed and, without waiting for the answer, came out, slamming the door. The following days were a real nightmare. At work, Alex felt every look of Mark as a blade. He feared that the chief suspected something. The heart pounded when he called him to the office, but talking was only about business, as if nothing happened. But the real hell was waiting at home. Emma did not retreat. She called the day and night. At first he ignored the calls, then blocked her number. But the next evening is a knock on the door. Alex opened and saw her. The eyes are red from tears, the voice trembled. "Alex, please, I can't." "Do you understand what you do?" he exclaimed, squeezing his fists. "If Mark knows, I end work, career, everything. I'm risking too, but I love you." She made a step closer. "Love?" Alex twisted. "You betrayed him. What will be different with me?" "That's else." Her voice was quiet but firm. "You are another." But Alex decided to put a point. "Go, Emma, and no longer come." She looked at him for a long time, eyes full of pain. Then she returned and left. But everything turned out to be not so easy. The next morning he saw an envelope under the door. Inside was a note. "You can ignore me, but you won't be able to forget me. If you don't come, I'll find you myself. E." And it all started again. Calls from unknown numbers. Message. She was waiting near his house, appeared near the office. Alex was on the verge. Alex stood in the middle of the room, breathing hard. He knew that all this was wrong, but could not stop. He continued to meet Emma, despite the fear of being exposed. He was held not only by passion, but also more, dependence on these prohibited relationships. Emma looked absolutely calm. She was not afraid that they were exposed. "You're too worried," she said one evening, lying on his chest. "Mark is busy. He has enough entertainment with his secretary." Alex shuddered. "Did you know?" "Yes, I have known about it for a long time," she replied boldly. "But it doesn't care." "Why don't you leave him then?" Alex asked, hoping to hear at least a hint of feeling for him. Emma smiled cunningly. "And why? He has a lot of money. I'm used to a good life. And his betrayal is little things. I take my own too." Alex felt cold in his chest. Her words were cut deeper than he expected. "What do I am for you?" His voice trembled. "You are pleasure for me, Alex. What is lacking in marriage? And Perhaps a little more, she said, holding her fingers on his neck. But let's be honest. We live a moment. And you know it. Alex stopped. He was bitter, but at the same time he could not break away from this game. He was drawn to her like an abyss. The days changed the nights, and their connection became deeper. At the same time, Alex began to feel anxious. He played with fire, and it seemed to him that the flame was already touching his skin. Alex continued to meet Emma, although he was increasingly felt in the soul. Her cynicism and coldness gradually eaten it from the inside. She was passionate, dangerous, but next to her, he began to feel someone else's. One evening, when he went to the cafe to drink coffee after training, his gaze stopped at the girl at a nearby table. She read the book from time to time, correcting a strand of hair by her ear. Her smile was easy, real, without a falsehood that has been pursuing it lately. "What do you read?" he asked, not noticing how he came closer. She lifted her gaze and smiled warmly. "He Who Runs in a Maze. Did you read?" "Honestly, so far. But it seems time to start," Alex replied, feeling the long, forgotten heat is waking up inside. She was called Sophie. She was simple and open, and with her he felt himself. Without lies, without secrets, without fear. They began to meet. A date in the park. Open. Air dinner. Talk to dawn. Alex felt for the first time that he was living for real. Alex and Sophie met secretly, as if living in their own world where no lies could penetrate. Their date was full of sincerity and lightness that he was so lacking in relations with Emma. They appreciated every moment together, knowing that their connection is something special, something that should be protected from other people's eyes. They often met in a small book cafe where they first got acquainted. Sophie loved to order hot chocolate with cinnamon, and Alex, black coffee. They could sit together for hours, talk about books, life, and dreams. He liked to listen to her. In her words, there was so much warmth and inspiration. She shared her thoughts about life, how important it is to be honest with herself, and it touched the deepest strings of his soul. In the evening, they often walked the waterfront, holding hands and laughing at the little things. Alex felt that next to Sophie, he was another, calm, free, real. She demanded nothing but honesty from him, and it frightened him most, because he had not yet dared to tell her about his past with Emma. One day they went outside the city, away from noise and fuss. On the shore of the lake they lit a campfire, and Sophie brought an old player. He was heard from light romantic music, and they danced just under the stars, her head resting on his shoulders, and Alex thought he was ready to give everything to keep these moments forever. "I don't know what will happen next," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "But I know I want to be with you." Sophie smiled and touched his face. "I'm not afraid of the future if we are together." Alex felt his heart filled with warmth. He wanted to protect this love from all over the world, from the past, from Emma. But deep inside he knew the shadow of his secrets was already closer. But at that moment, there was only one thing. She. His Sophie. Its new beginning. Alex and Sophie sat on the grass near the lake. Sophie looked at the water thoughtfully. Her voice sounded quietly, but with a bitter note. "I once made a lot wrong in man," she said, not looking from the lake's surface. "I loved him. I thought we were going to. We planned our future. We talked about everything. And then I learned that he was married. Everything was a lie." Alex felt an alarm in his chest with a cold wave. "Did he tell you anything?" he asked carefully. "No," Sophie replied, and her voice hardened. "He swore in love but hid his life from me. I was destroyed not by betrayal but a lie. I made myself a promise. Never forgive liars again." Alex felt his throat. Her words were like a knife on her heart. He was silent because he knew. He was also guilty of what she could not tolerate. He did not tell her about Emma. He did not say that there is a dark trace in his life, an unfinished, poisonous novel that still stretches for him like a ghost. The mind was throbbing. She has the right to know. But he was paralyzed by fear, the fear of losing it. But at that moment, he realized that he had a choice, either to end this lie now or to lose Sophie forever if the truth sails later. That evening, returning home, Alex no longer hesitated. He knew that he had to put a point. He called Emmy. "We need to meet." The next day, Emma came to his office. She went without knocking, as always, confident, cold, with her branded smile. Closing the door, she slowly approached his table and cast a shrewd look at him. "Well, Alex," she said with a slight irony, "wanted to say goodbye too officially?" Alex rose from his chair. His face was tense but decisive. "Emma, I called you to put a point. Everything is over. Once for all." She crossed her hands on her chest, her gaze. "Finished?" she repeated, tilting her head. "It's because of her, right?" "It doesn't matter," Alex replied firmly. "I don't want to live in lies anymore, neither in front of him nor in front of her." Emma swelled her eyes, and a sharp, icy tone appeared in her voice. "Do you think you are so honest? Did you tell her about us? About that you slept with your boss's wife?" Alex gritted his teeth. "No, but I will tell, today, and not because you make me, but because I want to be with her without lies." Emma smiled with a corner of her lips, a smile of a predator who knows that his prey herself goes to the trap. "Interesting. And how does she react when she learns that all this time you were a liar?" "She has the right to know the truth," Alex replied. His voice was solid as a stone. "And if that means she will leave me, I will accept it. But at least it will be honest." Emma came closer. Her voice became quiet but poisonous. "I liked Alex, but if you think you can just cross me so, you are wrong. If you burn the bridge, be ready that I will set you fire." He met her gaze without fear. "Do what you want, but I will no longer be your hostage." Emma stopped at the door but suddenly came back and came closer to him. In her eyes, something incomprehensible was burning, a mixture of challenge, passion, and farewell. "If it's really an end," she said quietly, "let me last at least the last time." She leaned closer. Her lips were a few centimeters from him. Alex frozen. His mind shouted, "Stop!" But the body shuddered from a familiar magnetism. She touched his lip, slowly, softly, with the dangerous tenderness he knew so well. And he could not resist. Their kiss was hot and bitter at the same time, as a memory of everything they had and about everything they lost. It was a farewell that became a trap. Suddenly, the cabinet door opened sharply. "Alex, I wanted—" A low voice came. Alex stopped, sharply pushing from Emma. His face faded. Mark stood on the doorstep, his chief, her husband. In the eyes of Mark, a surprise that instantly changed a cold, difficult look. There was a depressing silence, which seemed to suffocate all the air in the room. That is?" Mark's voice sounded deaf, like a thunder before the storm. Emma turned to him slowly. Her face was almost calm, but in the corners of her lips played a barely noticeable shadow of a smile. "Oh dear, how unexpectedly," Emma said, returning to Mark. Her voice was sweet, but cold caution flashed in her eyes. Mark frozen, his eyes threw lightning and jaws clasped so that it seemed like a crunch. "Explain," he said rigidly, looking directly at her. And then Emma suddenly took a step back. Her face covered the mask of unexpected fear. She grabbed her breasts as if she had just got out of danger. "Mark, Her voice shuddered, and tears appeared in her eyes that she did not even try to hide. "He joined me. I told him to stop." Alex felt the blood press to her head. He frozen in place, stunned by a blow that he did not expect. "What?" escaped from him. What do you say?" Emma sobbed, retreating closer to Mark. "I came here because he wanted to talk about work, but he began to touch me. I told him that I was your wife, but he—" Her voice broke. She pretended to be no longer talking about shock. Mark slowly turned his head to Alex. His eyes were anger, and they had no doubt. "Is this true?" His voice was quiet, but from him the frost went on the skin. "No!" Alex shouted sharply, feeling everything flies into the abyss. "It's a lie! She lies you just in your face!" "Lies?" Mark took a step forward. His fists were clenched. I saw you kissed." "She herself," Alex began, but Emma interrupted, her voice trembling. "He made me. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do." Alex looked at her, feeling his heart mowing in his chest. She played perfectly. Victim, defenseless, and all this is a lie. "Mark?" He tried to speak firmly, though the voice trembled from the rage. "She is lying. We had a novel. This is true. But it was with the consent. She came to me." "You blame my wife?" Mark's voice became low and dangerous. "Are you Even so much to say? Alex saw anger raging in Mark's eyes. I know I'm guilty, he said, trying to keep peace, but not what she blames me for. Emma spoke through tears again. I came here because I wanted to tell him that he would leave us alone, but he— No, Mark thundered, his voice cut a room like a thunder. He was breathing hard for a few seconds, then, without taking his eyes out of Alex, said cold, Went, you are released. In this city you will not be able to get a job more. I'm worried about it. Alex felt he got rid of inside. Mark! Now! He thundered. Alex stood for a few seconds, knowing what he lost. Emma stood next to her husband, and in the corner of her lips was a barely noticeable shadow of a victorious smile. You will still regret, Alex whispered, looking straight in the eye. No, she replied so quietly that only he heard. Alex turned and left, slamming the door. His heart was beating as if he wanted to escape. He lost everything, both work, trust, and reputation. But one he knew for sure, this is not the end, and he will not allow her to destroy him finally. Meanwhile, Sophie decided to make Alex surprise, to take it from work and invite him for dinner. She bought flowers and his favorite coffee and came to the office building. While she was waiting at the reception, she heard two employees who were talking lively behind her back. Did you hear what happened in Blake's office? Said one of them. Yes, the other replied, barely holding back the excitement. The chief found his wife, Emma, with Alex. They say there was a real scandal. Yes, I always suspected that there was something between them. She always spins near him. Yes, and now, apparently Alex Gaplick, the chief, will not forgive. Sophie, frozen in place, feeling the world around her, began to crumble into pieces. She felt the flowers fall out of her hands and fall gently on the floor. It became difficult for her to breathe. Alex. And his boss's wife? She couldn't believe her ears. Sophie returned sharply and left the building, not wanting to see him or hear his explanation. Her heart was beating so much that it seemed to break. She sat in the car, the fingers squeezed the steering wheel to the white. Inside everything boiled. Pain, insult, anger. A liar, she whispered. You turned out to be the same as everyone else. She was no longer waiting. Took out the phone and wrote to him a message. I know everything. You had a lover. You lied to me. I won't forgive that. Everything is over. Don't look for me. Sent. Alex came out of the office building, feeling that the whole world fell on his shoulder. The head was buzzing after a scandal with Mark and Emma. Everything he built was all he had spilled into powder. He took a deep breath of the cold air, hoping at least to come to his senses. The phone tied in his pocket. Alex mechanically pulled him out and saw a message from Sophie. His heart shuddered, as if from a shock. I know everything. You had a lover. You lied to me. I won't forgive that. Everything is over. Don't look for me. He read these lines several times, hoping that this is a mistake. But the message did not disappear. No, he whispered, feeling the earth from under his feet. Sophie. The hands trembled. The phone almost fell. The chest is briefed so much that it became difficult to breathe. No, no. His voice trembled, and in his eyes he was fierce. His first reaction is to call. He scored her number, but she didn't answer. Again, then yet, silence. Sophie, I ask? He exhaled into the void, but the only one he heard was a brief signal of the completed call. Despair covered it. He could no longer stay. The blow was too strong. He sat down on the border near the road, grabbing his head. Her voice sounded in her head. I never forgive lies again. And he did it. Lied. I was silent. He betrayed her trust. I destroyed everything, he whispered. Everything. His body trembled. Breathing was fragmentary, and his chest pain seemed almost physical. He lost everything, work, reputation, and now her. Sophie was the only light in the dark, and he extinguished this light himself. He looked at her message and felt he was covered by impotence. He did not know what to do next. He wanted to shout. I wanted to erase everything, turn back and do everything right, but it was too late. Sophie! He exhaled and his voice broke. People passed by without noticing the man who was desperate. He was indifferent. At that moment, he lost a benchmark. The world has become gray and empty. But at the very bottom of this emptiness, thought appeared. Last hope. I can't leave that way. I must, he whispered. Alex rose, and in his eyes, through pain and confusion, there was a determination. He knew he should find her, must tell her the truth, all, and if she leaves, it will be her choice. But he will not allow her to know the truth only because of the gossip and lies of others. I will fight for her, he said to himself, and strength appeared in his voice. Even if it is the last I will do. He moved forward, not knowing whether she would forgive him or not, but knowing that he would no longer hide from the truth. Alex couldn't wait. His heart fought in a frantic rhythm, and every second without Sophie seemed eternity. He knew that phone calls and messages would not help. He had to see her personally. He knew where she lives. Once she joked that it was easy to find it because she lives in a house with a red door. Now these doors have become the only way for him to hope. Alex came to her house in the evening. The light in the windows was burning, but he did not dare to call the door. He stood on the opposite side of the street, absorbing every nervous breath. He did not want to break into her space if she doesn't want it, but he had to talk. She had to tell her the truth. Half an hour has passed, then an hour. The night cold pierced him, but he didn't go. His eyes did not break from her windows. Nadia glowed in her heart. Finally, the door opened. Sophie left home. She was wrapped in a warm scarf and seems to be going somewhere. But when she saw him, her steps froze. Alex? Her voice was full of surprise, but cold. He took a few steps to her, on his face, despair and sincerity. Sophie, I ask you, listen to me, only a few minutes. If after that you say that I have to go, I'll go. Forever. She looked at him. Her eyes glowed with insult and pain. Why are you here, Alex? She asked hard. I told you, everything is over. Because I can't let you go so much, he replied. His voice trembled, but not from cold, but from fear of losing it. You have to hear the truth, all, from me. Sophie sighed. In her look there was sadness, but also curiosity. You have 2 minutes. Alex swallowed the air, gathering with his forces. Yes, I had a novel with Emma, this is true, but it is over. I broke everything before you learned. I didn't tell you because I was afraid to lose you, and so I'm wrong, I did a hand. But today she has twisted everything. She said, Mark, that I allegedly joined her. It's a lie. She wanted to destroy me, and she destroyed because I lose you. Sophie looked at him silently. Her gaze was sharp as a blade. Why should I believe you, Alex? Her voice was firm, but there was pain in it. You have lied to me once, and now I do not know where the truth is and where not. Alex stepped closer. His voice was almost whispers, but every word was imbued with sincerity. Because I no longer have what to hide. Because I am ready to lose everything. Work, reputation, but not you. I don't ask for forgive me right away. I ask me to prove who I am, really. Sophie was silent. Her heart was beating quickly, and she fought with herself. She wanted to expel him, close the door and put a point, but there was something else inside, a crack through which hope seeped. She paused. I don't know, Alex. It's too much for me. He lowered his head. I understand. If you say it's the end, I'll go. But know one thing. I love you. And this is the only truth in which I never lied. Sophie looked at him a few more seconds, seemingly eternity. Then she said quietly, Go home, Alex. I need to think. His heart squeezed, but he saw in her voice not a cold, but a hesitation, and it was more than he could hope. Good, he said hoarsely. I'll wait. How much is needed? He returned and slowly went to the night, and Sophie remained on the threshold, looking after him. Her heart was torn between pain and the desire to believe. She did not know what was going on. Meanwhile, at home, Emma and Mark stood one in the middle of the living room, and the air between them was stressed so much that it seemed to be about to explode. Mark thundered the door and returned to her sharply. His eyes were anger. You betrayed me with Alex, he said, and his voice echoed from the walls. My right hand! Do you even understand what you did? Emma stood, crossing her hands on her chest, and looked at him with cold contempt. Are you serious now? She threw sharply. Do you arrange a scene of jealousy? After all that he did? What did I do? Mark thundered, step forward. It betrayed me! You have destroyed everything! Emma suddenly laughed, briefly, sharply, with bitter irony. Oh, Mark, she said slowly. Her eyes flashed with cold fire. Do you really think I know nothing? He froze for a moment, his eyebrows pulled. What are you about? About your little adventure with the secretary. She threw the words sharply as if they dinned. Yes, Mark, I know everything, about your late meetings and business trips. Do you think I'm blind? Mark faded, but tried to hold the blow. It's nonsense, he grunted, but there was no confidence in his voice. Do not dare to translate the topic. Nosiness. Emma made a step forward. Her eyes shone with anger. I saw your message. I can't wait for our meeting. Do you think you're so cunning? And you! Mark exploded. His voice was hoarse from rage. You slept with Alex and don't even try to deny. Yes, Emma answered sharply, and her eyes were challenging. Yes, I had a novel with Alex. Do you know why? Because you first crossed this border. Because you betrayed me first. The room has a depressing silence. They stood in front of each other like enemies who finally dropped all the masks. That is revenge, Mark said coldly, squeezing his fists. No, Emma cut off. It was my decision. Because I no longer felt like your wife. You have been more important for you, your secretaries and your games. Mark ran a hand on his face. His voice became low and rigid. We both are liars. We are both traitors. Yes, Emma replied coldly. But the difference is that you were hiding as a coward. And at least I played openly. Mark clenched his teeth. His eyes became icy. What now? Is this end? Emma looked at him for a long time. Her look was rigid and empty. I don't know, she replied cold. Maybe we have been over for a long time. It just has become obvious today. Mark was silent. In the air, the truth hung in the air. Their marriage cracked for a long time. And today it was finalized. I hope your Alex was worth it, Mark said sharply, moving to the door. Emma threw him after a bitter smile. I hope your secretary, too. The door was slammed. There was only silence in the house. Silence after a storm that was grinding everything that once combined. Emma remained in the middle of the room. Her breasts were difficult to breathe rapidly, but gradually the tension began to fall. She looked at the living room, once a cozy place, and now only a scene for battle, where all the masks fell. Her fingers squeezed into his fists. She did not feel guilty. No, only emptiness and cold. She slowly went to the bar, poured a glass of wine, and made a big sip. Alcohol burned throat, but he could not warm that icy void inside. The phone tied. She glanced on the screen. Message from an unknown number. Emma, I hope you're satisfied. You and Alex have destroyed everything, but it's not an end. She smiled scornfully. Oh, Mark, she muttered, you always like to threaten, but now it is late. She turned off the phone and put a glass on the table. But suddenly the door called, a sharp, annoying call. She shuddered. Mark? Said it out loud, but the heart squeezed from anxiety. He never called, just came. Carefully approaching the door, she looked into the eye. Alex stood behind the threshold. She froze for a moment, then opened the door sharply. What are you doing here? Her voice was tense. Alex looked broken. His eyes were red, his face was pale, and his voice was low and broken. Emma, he said, everything went under 3 devils. Sophie, she learned, and I lost everything. Emma crossed her hands. Her look was prickly. And what do you want from me? Compassion? No, he shook his head. I wanted to know. You said, Mark, that I got to you. Why? Emma looked away. Icy sharpness appeared in her voice. Because you are naive, Alex. Did you really think you could just get away from me? You! He made a step closer. Bitterness sounded in his voice. Did you want to destroy me? Emma looked straight into his eyes. I wanted you to feel what I feel when I use and throw away. Alex retreated one step. His eyes eclipsed the pain. You betrayed me. You knew I wanted to be with Sophie. Sophie, she repeatedly repeated. Did you think you could build your little perfect life with her while I stayed in ruins? No, Alex. If I burn, you will burn too. Suddenly, the door call came again. Emma and Alex turned at the same time. Again? She straightened through her teeth, rushing to the door. If it is Mark? She opened the door. Sophie stood on the threshold. Emma's eyes expanded with surprise. Alex froze. His heart jumped to his throat. Sophie, he exhaled. Sophie looked at both of them. Her face was pale and her eyes were cold and prickly like crystal. Well, she said quietly. Her voice was beating from restrained anger. Beautiful scene. All the main actors are assembled. Emma quickly got over and crossed her hands. What are you doing here? Sophie looked at her, and in her eyes a fire broke out. I came to hear the truth. Not from gossip, from you. Alex took a step forward. Sophie, But she raised her hand, stopping it. Be silent. Her voice was decisive, but in it the insult. First, I want to hear her. She looked at Emma. You destroyed everything, so tell me, what really was between you? Emma swelled her eyes, and a thin smile appeared on her face. Do you want the truth? She said with a call. Okay. The truth is that your sweet Alex was with me. We were lovers, and so he lied to you. Emmo! Alex exclaimed. His voice trembled from anger and despair. Stop! Sophie did not look. Now tell me another, she said cold. Did you love him? This issue was caught by Emma by surprise. Her smile faded, and for a moment in her eyes something human. But she quickly turned the mask of indifference. Love? She laughed briefly and bitter. No, it was a game for me, and it ended. There was silence, heavy, suffocating. Sophie nodded slowly, her lips squeezed, but a strange clarity appeared in her eyes. Thank you, she said. Now I know everything. She returned to Alex. And now I know one thing. You betrayed me, but you did another. Her voice broke, but she did not let tears go out. You allowed her to manage our history. Alex stepped forward. In his eyes there was despair. Sophie, I made a terrible mistake, but I love you and only you. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said quietly, Maybe, but this is not enough. And turning around, she left. Alex rushed after her. Sophie, please! But the door closed, and he remained on the threshold, himself, with an empty heart and pain that broke him from the inside. Emma smiled behind his back, but in the corners of her eyes, something she did not expect, loneliness. This game did not have winners, only ruins. Alex stood at the closed door, feeling the last hope went with Sophie. His chest was squeezed with pain, and only one thought was spinning in his head. He destroyed everything, with your own hands. Slowly returning, he saw Emma standing at the table, crossing his hands on his chest. Her smile was thin, almost abused, but something else was red in the eyes. Emptiness. Satisfied? Alex said hoarsely. His voice was tense, full of bitterness. You succeeded. You won. Emma looked at him for a few seconds and then replied cold. It was not a game, Alex. It was a reality, and there are no winners. He took a step to her, and in his eyes anger broke out. Why was it all? Why did you destroy everything around? Emma sharply put a glass on the table, and the crystal rolled on the marble. Her indifference mask suddenly cracked, and a bitter voice broke out of her. Because you lied to me. You promised you would be with me, and then just left. I threw me away as if I had never had a meaning. Alex froze, shocked by this explosion. You knew that there was never the future between us. Maybe so, she interrupted sharply. Her voice trembled from emotions. But you were the only one who saw me not only as Mark's wife. I felt alive with you. And then, you just decided that I was not worth it, even honest goodbye. There was silence, heavy and suffocating. Alex ran a hand on his face, feeling anger and sympathy in it. You know, he said finally, you had a chance to say all this differently, but you chose lies, manipulations, betrayal. You turned it all into a ruin. Emma looked at him for a long time, and then her face became cold as ice. Perhaps, but you are not an angel, Alex. We are the same with you. He shook his head. No, I don't want to be like that anymore. Suddenly, Emma's phone tied on the table. She looked at the screen machine and saw the message. From Mark. I filed for divorce. The lawyer will contact you. We have nothing to talk about. Emma has frozen. Her fingers slowly squeezed the phone, and she felt the cold fragments of her life would pour her under her feet. Alex noticed a change in her face. Mark? He asked quietly. She nodded slowly. Her eyes were empty as if she were looking through him. He filed for divorce. Her voice was hoarse, almost alien. Now everything is official. She put her phone on the table and sat down for a moment, grabbing her head. And what now? She whispered almost to herself. It's over. Alex looked at her and suddenly felt strange. No anger, only emptiness and compassion. Now, he said quietly, you can start living without lies. Emma looked at him. A tear flashed in her eyes, but she quickly wiped her with her hand. And you? She asked. Alex sighed. His voice sounded exhausted. And I will try to return the person I really love, if she still gives me a chance. He moved to the door, but stopped on the doorstep. Farewell, Emma. I hope you will find what you were looking for. She was silent, only looked after him. The door closed, and only she remained in the room, in the middle of the wreckage of her illusions. Emma held her hand on the face, breathed heavily, and whispered in the void, "Farewell, Alex." And a new day began outside the window, a day without them. Emma parted with Mark. It was a difficult, grueling divorce that turned her life into a real war. Meetings, lawyers, endless disputes, all this suffered forces and nerves. Mark did not want to go peacefully. He accused her of betrayal, the destruction of marriage, and used it as weapons in court. He was ruthless. His influence and money did their business. Lawyers have broken each of her demand for pieces. When everything is over, she has almost nothing left. The gorgeous house remained a brand. The joint accounts were frozen, and most of the assets went to him. She only got a small amount and her own personal belongings. She stood in the middle of an empty leased apartment, a small, cold stranger. The boxes with things were chaotically scattered around the room. Once she lived in the world of expensive wines, branded dresses and parties, and now an old sofa, a small kitchen, and a silence that gave it deftly in the walls. Emma took a glass with wine and sat on the windowsill looking at the twilight city. Her eyes were dry, tears were no longer left. "You won, Mark," she said aloud into the void. "Took everything he could. But you didn't take the main thing, me." Her voice was quiet, but something else swells in it. Not evil, but as if a spark that remained in ashes. The phone tied on the table. She looked at the screen. Message from lawyer. "The case is closed. You're officially divorced." Emma postponed the phone. She felt everything inside. But at the same time, there was a strange relief. "Free," she whispered, as if trying this word to taste. Yes, she lost everything. But for the first time in a long time, everything was clean. Without masks, without lies, without others' expectations. And now it was an empty page. And empty pages are a chance to write a new story. And she will write it as she wants. Alex did not give up. After that difficult conversation with Sophie, he realized if he wants to return it, he has not words, but prove the actions that he has changed. He started with a simple one. He wrote a letter to her, real paper, without justification, no pressure, only sincerity. "Sophie, I don't ask you to forget you. I have no right. But I ask you to give me a chance to become a better version of myself. For you. I won't be pressed. Just know I'll be there, and I will wait as much as needed. Alex." He left a letter in her mailbox. There was no answer, but he did not stop. He knew that Sophie loves books, so he ordered her the first edition of her beloved novel, He Who Runs the Maze, with the personal signature of the author. He added a note to the book. "For the strongest girl who always finds a way out of any maze, Alex." Sophie received the parcel and looked at the book for a long time. She felt something soft touched her heart, but she did not write to him. Not yet. Next week, Alex learned from the joint acquaintances that Sophie dreamed of visiting contemporary art. He bought 2 tickets and sent her one with a short note. "I don't know if you are ready to go there with me, but this ticket is, even if you go alone, because your dreams are important to me. Alex." Sophie hesitated. But on the day of the exhibition, it still went. She came alone, without him. But when she passed the gallery, her gaze stopped in one picture, and Alex stood next to her. He kept at a distance, did not fit, did not insist, only smiled briefly and said, "I'm glad that you came." They passed the exhibition together, without pressure, without talking about the past, and Sophie felt peace. Over time, Alex continued to do small but significant things for her. Sent coffee to her office with the inscription on the glass, "You have strength for this day, for no reason, just because you're beautiful." Left a bouquet with daisies at her door, her favorite flowers, though she had never told him before. I came to the charity race in which she participated, and waited for the finish line with a bottle of water, and in the words, "I will always be there, even if we don't run together." Sophie first kept the distance, but she saw he did not try to buy it. He was around, patiently, sincerely. One evening when it was raining, Alex returned home and suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Alex." He looked around. Sophie stood in front of him. Her hair was a little moist from the rain, and her eyes were deep and warm. "I saw you trying. I felt it." Her voice trembled, but was confident. "I merged with you, very. But even more, I was afraid that you would stop fighting. Alex looked at her and his heart pounded. I will never stop fighting for you, Sophie, never. She took a step towards him. Then let's try again, but this time, honestly, without secrets, without lies. Alex felt his heart filled with heat, which he considered lost forever. He gently took her hand. I promise, only like that. And when their lips met, it was not just a kiss. It was forgiveness. It was a new beginning. And this time, without lies, only with love. Alex and Sophie started over. Their relationship became slow, cautious, but real. They talked a lot. About the past, about pain, about their fears. Alex did not hide anything, and Sophie no longer kept everything inside. They learned to trust again, step by step. One evening, they sat on the roof of the house, drank wine, and looked at the stars. Sophie suddenly said quietly, You know, I thought for a long time whether you should forgive. But I realize that your mistakes are part of you, and if I love you, then I accept this part too. Alex took her hand in his own. I will never allow myself to betray your trust again. You are the most valuable for me. She smiled, and in her eyes it was warm. I know it. Their days were filled with joy, joint breakfasts, park walks, evenings with movies. They built not just a relationship, but a partnership where honesty, support, and love were. But life, as always, had their trials. One day, Alex received a message from Emma. We need to talk, it's important. Alex felt a cold run on his back. He hesitated, but eventually replied. Okay, where will we meet? They agreed to meet in the cafe. Emma came, changed. She no longer looked like the cold woman she remembered. In her eyes there was fatigue, but something else, as if devastation after the storm. Thank you that she came, she said, sitting opposite. What happened, Emma? Alex looked at her wary. She sighed, twisted a cup in her hands. I did not call to quarrel. Everything that was between us is over. I understand that. But I came to warn you. Alex was alert. To warn? What? Emma looked straight into his eyes. Mark, evil, very. After divorce, he lost control of himself, and he did not forgive me or you. Alex felt the tension squeezing his chest. What do you want to say? He threatened you, she said quietly. He said he would do everything to lose everything you have. He wants to take revenge. Alex gritted his teeth. Why do you tell me that now? Emma lowered her gaze, and something that Alex never expected in her voice was heard. Sincerity. Because I'm tired of destruction. And perhaps for the first time in my life, I want to do the right thing. Alex was silent for a few seconds, thinking about her words, then quietly replied, Thank you for warning. Emma looked up and added, Take care of Sophie, he knows about her. And if he wants to hit, he will do it through her. Alex felt everything inside, everything from fear for the most valuable thing he has. I won't allow him to harm her, he said firmly. I hope, Emma said, because if you lose it, it will be worse than any revenge. She got up, threw a few bills on the table, and said goodbye. Farewell, Alex, and let you be lucky. Alex looked after her, feeling that this chapter was finally closed, but the new one could become even more dangerous. He left the cafe and immediately scored Sophie. Hi, her warm voice was heard. How are you? Sophie, he said, trying to hold back anxiety, I want you to know, whatever happens, I will always protect you. Alex, what happened? Her voice changed. There was a concern. Just, I love you, and this is the most important. I love you too, she replied gently, and I'm with you. Alex felt her words filled with power. Then we will handle, together. But somewhere in the shade there was already a storm, and this time he was ready to fight for his happiness until the end. The following days, Alex did not find a place. Emma warning did not leave the head. He knew. If Mark really wanted to harm, he would hit the most painful place, on Sophie. Alex decided to act on ahead. He increased the safety in his apartment, installed cameras, changed the castles. He even suggested Sophie temporarily live together, but she refused. Alex, she said calmly, I do not want to live in fear. If your former boss thinks that he can break us, he is wrong. Her strength inspired him, but the alarm did not disappear. One evening, Sophie returned from work. She almost approached her house when she noticed a black sedan standing nearby. The car seemed a strange familiar to her. She was already going to walk past, but the rear glass dropped a little, and there she saw Mark. Good evening, Sophie, his cold voice came. Sophie stopped, but did not step back. What do you want? Her voice was firm, though everything was strained inside. The brand lips stretched in a barely noticeable smile. Just talk. You are a smart girl, so listen carefully. He leaned a little forward, and his look became sharp as a blade. Alex destroyed my life. Now I'm destroying it. But you have a choice. If you want everything to end quietly, just go. Come from him, and then I will leave you alone. Sophie felt anger in her chest. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? Mark swung his eyes. I think you understand that I am capable of much. In business, in life, I always get what I want. If you stay with Alex, I promise, you will regret. Sophie took a step forward. Her eyes were determined. You know what your problem is, Brand? You are used to thinking that everyone around is sold or frightened, but I'm not one of them. She looked at him just in the eye. I love Alex, and no threats will change it. Mark smiled, but in his eyes a cold metal flashed. Then you made your choice. He raised his hand, and at that moment, Sophie saw the light. A CCTV camera broke out before her house. You just wrote down all this, Mark, she said, just nodding noticeably towards the camera. And if something happens to me or Alex, the police will receive this entry. The Brand face was fossilized for a moment, then his smile disappeared. Smart, he muttered, leaning on the seat, but you will still regret that the road has crossed me. The car moved from the place and disappeared around the corner. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to reassure the heart that was pounding. She immediately typed Alex. Sophie! His voice was concerned. What happened? He was here, Alex. Mark, he threatened me, but I recorded everything. I'll be now. Anger and anxiety were felt in his voice. A few minutes later, Alex rushed to her house. He rushed to her and hugged firmly. Are you whole? He whispered, pressing her to himself. Yes, she replied, feeling his body tremble. I coped. Alex dropped and looked into her eyes. I will not allow him to approach you anymore. Sophie put her hand on his cheek. We will handle, together. The next morning, Alex rendered a police recording. He knew. Mark was a dangerous enemy, but now they were ready. But Mark was not going to give up so easy. His next blow could be much more insidious. But Alex and Sophie were together, and this time they will not fight for the past. They will fight for their future, and they will not retreat. The next few days were alarming. Police have accepted a statement and recording from cameras as proof of threats. But as always, the system worked slowly. Alex and Sophie understood that Mark could act faster than the law. Alex almost did not leave Sophie. They moved a few days to the hotel to change the environment and not let Mark find them. But the voltage did not disappear. One morning, Alex got a message from an unknown number. Do you like to live in fear? This is only the beginning. You took everything from me. I will make you feel the same thing. Oh. Alex squeezed the phone so much that the bones of the fingers were white. It's Mark, he said, showing Sophie's message. He starts his game. We will not win him, Sophie said firmly. He wants to intimidate us. But we will be together, and this will truly destroy it. On the same day, Alex received a call from his bank. His credit cards have been blocked by trying to break the account. Then a notification came from work. Someone sent compromise emails on his name. He beats on all fronts, Alex strained. But this is not enough. He wants more. And he was not mistaken. The following evening, Sophie found that someone had sent an anonymous letter to her employer with fake accusations of unethical behavior at work. It's him, she said, holding the phone. He wants to destroy our reputation. Alex saw her fingers tremble and felt the rage inside his. Enough, he said firmly. If he wants war, he will receive it. The next day, Alex decided to act differently. He turned to his friend, a private detective named Nate Parker, who once helped him in a difficult cause. Mark wants to destroy me, Alex said during a meeting with Nat, but I am sure that he himself has dark spots. Find them. I'll do it, Nate replied. But get ready. If you dig deep, you can find very dirty things. A few days later, Nate returned with the results. His face was serious. Alex, he began, I found something. And this is a big deal. What exactly? Alex strained. Nate put several photos and documents on the table. Your friend, Mark, is not so pure. His company has dubious financial transactions. He washed money through false firms. If it becomes known, it will sit for a long time. Alex looked at the evidence and his eyes flashed with determination. This is exactly what we need. But there is something else, Nate added. His voice has become more serious. I found out that Mark hired people to follow you. You have little time. Alex felt the heart squeezing. Sophie. He rushed to the hotel. His hands trembled when he recruited Sophie's number. She answered right away. Alex? Sophie, listen to me. Lock the door. I will be now. What happened? Mark, he can act right now. I'm leaving. Alex raced, despite the traffic lights. There was one thing in his head, to make it. When he drove to the hotel, he saw a black SUV at the entrance. His heart was crazy. He jumped out of the car and ran into the hall. The elevator seemed too slow, so he ran to the stairs. On the floor heard a muted noise and a sophisticated voice. Get away from me! Alex rushed forward and saw in the corridor of two chunky men in black, and between them, Sophie. Release it! He robbed, rushing forward. One of the men tried to stop him, but Alex, covered in rage, struck him in his face. The second pounced, but Sophie struck his bag on his head and he shook. Alex, she shouted. He grabbed her hand. Let's run! They rushed the corridor. The steps were heard behind. The guards were bent. Alex saw the door of the emergency stairs and rushed to them. They ran outside where Nate was already waiting in the car. Fast, sit down, he shouted. Alex and Sophie jumped inside and the car rushed out of place. Who are they? Sophie asked. Mark people, Alex replied, clenching his fists. He crossed the border. In the car, Nate stretched Alex's flash. All the evidence here. Take them to the police. It's time to complete this game. Alex looked at Sophia. She clenched his hand. Do it, for us. The next morning, Alex personally handed the flash drive to the investigator. If it's true, the investigator said, your enemy shines with a prison term. A few days later, Mark was arrested directly in his office. The face that was always cold and confident this time reflected shock and rage. You will still regret, he shouted when he was led in handcuffs. It's not the end. But Alex knew was the end. That evening, when everything finally ended, Alex and Sophie stood on the shore looking at the sunset. It was, Sophie began, but Alex has a gentle interrupted. It was our test, and we passed it, together. She came back to him and whispered, I told you that we would handle. Alex smiled, and looking in her eyes said, and now I want us to start a new section, without fear, without the past. He dropped on one knee, opening a small velvet box with a heel. Sophie, you made me better. You are my strength, my heart, and my future. Will you come for me? Her eyes were filled with tears, but these were tears of happiness. Yes, Alex, you are my everything. They kissed under the evening sky, and this kiss was the beginning of a new life, the life they will create together, stronger than any trials. And now nothing could divorce them. Alex and Sophie decided to leave everything behind. After all that they survived, lie, betrayal, threats, this city became a place of pain and memories that they no longer wanted to carry in themselves. Let's start with a blank sheet, Alex said, holding Sophie by his hand, in a city where no one knows our past. And where we will write our future, Sophie added, smiling. A week later, they were already packing things. Alex sold his apartment, Sophie was fired from work, and they bought tickets at one end, to a small seaside town where dawn smells of the sea and the evenings are filled with silence and peace. The trip was long but easier than they expected. They held hands and made plans for the future. Will we open a small cafe? Sophie suggested. Or the bookstore, Alex winked, that you can live among the stories you love so much. And you will cook coffee for visitors, she smiled, and every cup will be with history. When they came to the new city, they were met with fresh sea air and a surf. They rented a cozy house overlooking the sea. In the evening, sitting on a veranda with glasses of wine, they were silent. But in this silence, there was more meaning than 1,000 words. You know, said Sophie, I'm no longer afraid, neither the past nor the future, because now I know whatever happens, you will be around. Alex took her hand, gently kissed, and whispered, always. The following months, they dedicated to arrange their new life. Alex found a small room and opened a coffee shop called Second Chance. Second Chance, because for them both it was a symbol of a new beginning. Sophie made a cozy corner in a cafe where you could read books and leave their own for others. Life flowed with its calm rhythm. They woke up under the noise of the waves, greeted dawn together, and made common dreams. One morning, when the sun was just starting to golden the room, Sophie touched Alex's hands and whispered, "Alex, we will have a baby." He froze for a second, and then a pure, boundless happiness appeared in his eyes. "Sophie," his voice broke from emotions, "this is the best gift in my life." He pressed her to himself, and they felt this section of their history is just beginning. They left the city, but took with them the most valuable thing: their love, their truth, and their faith in a second chance. And now their future belonged only to them. Years passed. Alex and Sophie lived their new life with the heat that they have so hard. Their second chance cafe became the heart of a town, a place where people gathered not only to drink coffee, but also to share stories, to find inspiration, to feel part of something real. Sophie made a booklet for book exchange. She always told the visitors, "Everyone has a second page of their history. Sometimes you just need to turn the first." Their lives were filled with even more meaning when their daughter Lily was born. She was their sun, their hope, and a reminder that even after the greatest storm, a clear day always comes. Alex, holding a little Lily in her hands, whispers quietly to her, "You are our second chapter, the best of all." The trials they passed did not erase from memory, but now they were just part of the past. They hardly heard about Mark and Emma. Alex knew that Mark had been convicted of financial crimes. Emma disappeared from his life forever after divorce. But Alex no longer looked back. His world was here, next to Sophie and Lily. One evening, when the sun seated in the sea, they all sat on the beach. Lily ran on the sand, and Alex hugged Sophie, holding her hand. "Remember," Sophie whispered, "you once said you would fight for me." Alex smiled, looking at her. "And I won the biggest battle because I got you. And now we have the whole world." She pressed against him. "We are together, and this is our greatest victory." They were no longer afraid of the past. They lived the present, and they looked into the future, together, holding hands firmly. Because real love always gives a second chance. End.